Welcome to the Power of Culture. I'm Mayassa bint Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. My nation, Qatar, is on a creative journey, supporting the talents of a rising generation, reaching out to other countries through the arts and building an entire cultural infrastructure. In December 2023, Qatar Museums will host a ceremonial groundbreaking for the new Lusail Museum. Both a global think tank and a world-class art museum, the Lusail Museum will be a completely new kind of institution rooted in the movement of ideas and perspectives, fostering constructive dialogue and debate on the most pressing issues of our time. This museum has been designed by the Pritzker Prize-winning architects Herzog de Meuron. My guest today is one half of that partnership, Swiss architect Jacques Herzog. Let's start the conversation. As you know, I'm doing a series of conversations with people who are working with us on projects in Qatar and have had a long history. And remind me, Jacques, when did we meet the first time? Was it, 15 years ago?
I think so, yes. I could double check.
I remember I was trying to find you ever since I saw the building that you did in Barcelona.
Okay.
And I was trying to track you down.
Okay.
I was not successful. But then I asked Nick Sirota because you had just done something with the Tate Modern announcement or something. You didn't open the building yet, did you?
We opened Tate Modern in the year 2000, but not the second phase. The second phase was opened to 2016.
So it was Nick Sirota then, because you had opened. So I said to him, Nick, I've been trying to chase these Jacques Herzog de Meuron architects. We really want to commission them for the future. At that time, it was called the Orientalist Museum. Could you help me connect with them? And the next day we were speaking to each other. So
fabulous.
You've been building museums all around the world for so long, but each project is unique. How do you, as an architect and as aspiring architects, listen to this conversation? How do you make this uniqueness happen through your process of thinking?
First of all, yes, we want to do the projects different from each other, whether it's a museum or something else, for the simple reason that there's one psychological explanation, which is that we do not want to be put in a drawer of being like this or like that or having this or that style. But that was not a conscious move at the beginning, but more and more we became aware of that kind of psychological moment and in our thinking and in our approach. But more importantly, I think buildings tend to be in very different parts of the world, in different cultures, in different geographical, political, cultural contexts. And architecture is made for a specific place. So obviously, architecture has to respond to that diversity. And that's how also museums are very different, because on top of the geographical givens, it's also programmatically very different each time.
Yeah, and you're based in Basel. To me, Basel is one of the most beautiful cities or towns in Europe. And it's also where the first museum in Europe was built. And you have the largest art fair, Art Basel. You also have the watch fair and many more things. Do you think that influence, you growing up in a city or town like Basel, influenced your outlook to life?
Certainly it attracted us maybe more to art, or in a different way. It was attractive for us. I don't remember when, but I was attracted to art in the art museum relatively early as a teenager. And not only does the museum have an exquisite collection of art from its beginning in the Middle Ages till the contemporary time, but especially the focus on the more radical approach of artists working today was always a very explicit and outspoken focus that directors, curators, and also collectors in the Basel area had. Think of the Hoffman Foundation, Emanuel Hoffman Foundation, which is a very important part of what makes the museum so important. And their focus is art that is being produced today. In the 70s, when I began to think about what should I do in the future, I was always hesitating between science and art. Architecture was not an idea at that time. And both science and art have very strong roots in Basel. The life science industry is here. There is a lot of scientific research. And as you said, also art plays an eminent role. At that time in the 70s, this kind of influences that came from America, from Donald Judd especially, who has a very intellectual position. And also from the northern side, the northern tradition of Romanticism, in the work of Joseph Beuys was a strong inspiration and influence in these early days.
Yeah, you did study commercial design, then biology, then chemistry. And, do you think, your architectural design is very minimal, I would say. How did all of these subjects and influences take you in that direction to minimal architecture?
In the 70s, it was a rise of postmodernism that we literally hated, this kind of neoclassical attempts that came from America and also from Europe, expressed in the work of so many architects whose work is now a bit forgotten, I would say. But at that time, it was very, very powerful, and I really didn't like it. I didn't like especially how people like James Sterling or Hans Hollein and others did conceive museums based on that kind of neoclassical repertoire, whereas artists were using lofts and reused industrial spaces for their production and also for the display of art. So we found actually, as a young person, whatever the business is that you're in, you have to create your own path. You have to find your own way into the business. And we knew that a radical departure from that neoclassical tendencies would be our way, without knowing exactly where we wanted to go. And so we did early projects like the Goetz Gallery or the Ricola Storage Building and a few others, which then I became aware are minimal sculptures or minimal architectures, has shifting between art objects and architecture. And that's then when I also said this is minimal architecture, and nobody has used that term at that time because architects were not exposed to the same degree to tendencies in contemporary art as we were. And as I mentioned before, like especially the influence of Judd was very powerful. And I saw a big potential in translating some of those ideas of minimalism into an architectural language. I have to add maybe something. Later only did it become a kind of a style. Architects tended to adopt that also and make it their individual expression, and especially for interiors, but also for architects. Quite famous names, actually. But then already it didn't interest us anymore so much because we found minimalism an attitude, to go away from something that we didn't like in that time. But it was never something that we felt at home as a style, whereas later it became a style, especially in Switzerland. It became like an expression of sober, Protestant, clean kind of approach to interiors, to materials and facades.
That's really interesting what you're saying. So you're essentially distancing yourselves from architects and being influenced by artists at a time where no one was, created your own minimal language. And then when all architects were following, you distance yourself again. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was also a moment when, as I said at the beginning, we wanted to escape rather than embrace style. But we saw architecture because we didn't know what is actually architecture and what can architecture be today. How can you do? What are the ingredients to produce architecture if you do not accept style, because many artists and architects hide themselves behind their style, and this is like a prison. So minimalism can also become a prison. It's a kind of an abstraction, or whatever is not abstract and clean is not right. So we experimented with letters that could be used for facades, with photography, with ornaments. We rediscovered ornaments that were criminalized, as you know, in the 20th century, and Adolf Loos was writing texts about Ornament und Verbrechen, which means ornament and crime. So we experimented with the potential that this could still have in architecture, and we produced buildings such as the library in Cottbus or the library in Eberswalde, where we collaborated with Thomas Ruf, the photographer. We invented a new technique to use concrete surfaces like photographic paper. So the photograph is not just printed on it, but is literally inserted or scribbled into the surface of the concrete. So we discovered material, to explore material, and we discovered the potential of making ornament something inherent, something holistic, and not just applied. And if you think of traditional architecture in the past, also in Islamic cultures, but also in Christian cultures, in literally around the world, ornaments were always more than just decoration. They were part of the cultural identity of people and of places. And we have lost all of that in modernity and after the industrialization. So I tried to find a way in a given project, in a specific context, to bring back ornament as a possible tool to create contemporary architecture.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this interdisciplinary approach, and we'll get back to that later when we discuss your project in Qatar, the Lusail Museum. Before that, I just want to, give our listeners a bit more background information on the projects you have done elsewhere. Before we get there, however, can you tell me, how did you choose Pierre de Meuron as your partner in architecture?
I never chose him, but
did he choose you?
Yeah, no, also not. But we were going together to primary school at the age of 6. And so we were literally in the same class without choosing that between the age 6 and age 19 when we finished college. So we always changed the school and came together. We ended up being in the same class. And so we are school friends from early days on. And we also spend much time in free time producing interesting objects together, like, copying not only buildings, but also other things. We were producing also boats, little boats and ships. And I was producing clothes for the dolls of my sister. So we did that kind of stuff. And so we were just school friends. And when at around 18, as I said earlier, I was hesitating between art and science. I started to study chemistry and biology, but then was more attracted to art, and I was working as an artist during my studies as an architect till age 35 or so, till I then said I make a decision for one thing, which is architecture. And Pierre also gave up his early thinking about becoming an engineer and also went into architecture. And so we ended up studying together architecture without saying we will do an office together. But since we have been playing and being together as children, I think it's like in the world of animals, two animals get used to each other and help each other, get along, and we combined and connected our mutual talents and, helping to reduce the impact of our weaknesses against something which could be more powerful as we do it together.
No, you definitely complement each other. You're so different, but I think that creates a very interesting synergy in your practice. So I want to go back to the first building I saw in Barcelona, the Forum building, and I think it was designed for the Expo or some sort of big conference I was attending at the time. I believe I was attending with my husband. It was a gas and energy conference. That's been converted now to the Museum of Natural Science of Barcelona. My question to you, were you already thinking of this potential transition of a functional foreign building to a museum at that time, or did that happen later, post-event?
It was open for different functions, but the idea of a natural history museum was mentioned before, but as you say, then the transformation from an exhibition hall into a museum came later, but was already conceived. It was already, if you look at the how the building is done, it's very topographical, I would say, in its context, in its way to deal with the urban surrounding. It has these sunken patios, it has these light wells that penetrate the building. It was very much conceived as a public attractor, as a public magnet, as something where people could hang around and be attracted by the diversity of spaces that it offers.
And then another project, which also is a conversion, is the Tate Modern, which was a power plant and a building you've described for the 21st century. And aside from it being an important museum with a great collection of modern and contemporary art, it also revitalized the whole neighborhood, downtown London. Could you say a bit more about that?
I think that's the most radical thing I've ever seen. Before it was a museum, it became a museum through our intervention, and I have to say, before Nick Serota, it's all his merit. In fact, he discovered that kind of in German one would say Dornröschenschloss, like a castle, a fairy tale castle hidden behind shrubs and wire fences. There was no city, but it was very prominent in its location. The tower of the chimney flirts with the tower of St. Paul's Cathedral, the most important building still today in London. So it was actually almost like an acupunctural operation, because when as soon as you put your needle into that part of the city, a part of town, it releases incredible hidden energies, and that's exactly what happened. Not only did the public come to that building and make London really a city for contemporary art, because before London was very much focused on its own tradition and culture. It was very British, and international contemporary art was rather excluded. So the Tate became a global pole for contemporary art, but it radically transformed the city. As I said, the comparison with the acupunctural needle is really what was happening there. And like I would say an avalanche, like a storm of investment money went into that place and transformed the surrounding of the museum radically, even before it was finished. So that was certainly a lesson in how cultural institutions and cultural platforms can invigorate investment and can attract investment. And it was rather a problem, and still is rather a problem, to stop that all too commercial development around the building than to animate or encourage it even more.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, the Tate's only opened about 22 years ago, and not many people realize, I think, that what this building used to be and how it really transformed the whole area. And something similar in Qatar, where, as you know, we've transformed the fire station into an artists in residence, our former civil defense building. We just transformed our former Ministry of Interior into the NED, the hotel, and our only flour mill, or what was the only flour mill, is turning into the future Museum of Modern Contemporary Art. So it's really fascinating that you're saying a city like London, with all its landmark buildings, also took this approach thanks to Nick and yourself. So it's quite interesting.
I think in Qatar is different insofar as you are building a city and a nation with each project. You add. It's really like, that's also like how we conceive the Lusail Museum. Now it sits on an island, on an artificial island, but that's very, let's say, specific and typical for Qatar. It's the border between land and water is not completely fixed forever, and each project adds to this. And that's why it's especially important. It's not just architecture, it's not just investment, but it's really programmed in a smart way so that this new land gain, so to speak, really will live, will become alive, and will infuse life, not only commercial life but also cultural life. And I think that's why I see the Lusail project such an important project for your whole country.
It's quite interesting, don't you think, that we break ground with Lusail Museum when Qatar and Switzerland are celebrating 50 years of bilateral relations. You're, I believe, the first Swiss architect to have a major building in Qatar, and the Swiss museums and Swiss collectors have one of the most important collections in the world. How does that make you feel to be a symbol of bilateral or cultural diplomacy between Qatar and Switzerland?
Well, I don't know whether I'm a symbol for that, but I am happy that we can, from a small country, we can work in such different cultural and political contexts. And we try to especially not bring in any kind of ideology or ideological or express some kind of ideology wherever we work. But we really try to implement platforms, as I explained before, which have this kind of acupunctural function to infuse life, to infuse public life, to infuse interest of people coming together and enjoying art or whatever then the program is, or exchange. I think, especially in the case of the Lusail Museum, I think the change in the programming that we have seen over the years towards from a pure museum towards something which is more also a platform for debate and public debate is very interesting in itself.
I remember from one of the very first conversations we had, you expressed your fascination of mosques and Islamic architecture, and you integrate this into your minimalist design of Lusail that's influenced by the old souk that you discovered in Qatar. Can you say a little bit about that, your fascination with Islamic architecture and how you've taken the concept of mosques inside the museum?
Yes, I have visited quite a large number of mosques and Islamic architecture, especially in Turkey, but also Egypt, of course, also in Qatar, but also in Tunisia, in Spain. And I must say that especially the mosque, the Mezquita in Cordoba, is one of my favorite buildings of all times. It's an 8th, 9th century mosque. I call it supermarket typology. It has like different typologies in the world of mosques. We know that the main inspiration comes from the basilica, the Roman basilica, which was multiplied, and that is one of the reasons for my fascination. The Islam is a much younger religion than Christianity, but the Christians took much longer to express or to find architectural identity for their beliefs. They had the basilica, the Roman basilica, which gradually grew into what was then a Christian church with lateral wings and the central wing and the dome, etc. Of course, they had the dome-style typology for Hagia Sophia, which then became an Islamic mosque later. So that was a typology that is typically Christian, let's say, from the 5th century, but that's 400-500 years after the birth of the religion. Whereas in the Islamic world, this kind of mezquita typology, which is not just 3 rows, but is as a tendency almost an endless row of pillar of colonnades, is what I call a supermarket. Is very even. It's non-directional, like Christian churches are much more directional. And it, of course, has also a center in mezquitas, but much less pronounced. And it created a type of space which did not exist, has never existed before. And briefly, roughly 100 years after, that religion came to the world. And the Mezquita in Cordoba is one of the early expressions of that. You also have in Kairouan a similar typology, which is also equally fascinating and literally gives you a kind of a feeling of what architecture can do, which is beyond being religious or being just interested in a kind of as an art history moment or an architectural history moment. But these buildings have something beyond that. It's very difficult to express it. It has to do also with how they were built. All these early mosques were built with spolia, with fragments from antique buildings. So they were literally put together, assembled, using wood, using marble, using fragments, almost like children were playing and putting this together to something new and something that didn't exist before. And that all of that makes the fascination for these very early mosques. And then, of course, I also visited mosques which were built much later, during the Mamluk period or whatever, and they have have an amazing evolution. We all know that Islam has had very fruitful period in this 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries. They were very fruitful periods for architecture.
What material are you considering for the Lusail Museum?
We tend to use materials that we find in a place, ideally, and especially in Qatar. I think it's very important that you don't need to ship to bring in all the resources from outside the country. And there is amazing amount of sand and stone and different mineral qualities. Even salt is an interesting material. And we try to do a kind of a conglomerate material with all these materials. We will only start doing experiments, but we try to avoid concrete in the more conventional way. We certainly will add cement in all these experiments, but we try to use what we find. We dig out, we immediately use that to build the foundation and also the elevation of the spaces.
You talk about the facade of the building of the Lusail Museum that had influenced you from visiting the souk in Qatar. And as you know, for the World Cup, Switzerland has qualified, but also to celebrate the future Lusail Museum launch, when we celebrate Qatar, Switzerland's 50 years, we are preparing 4 exhibitions on this museum. One on Palestine with the labor of love, another on 25 years of Al Jazeera, and an exhibition in Al Riwaq. Lusail Museum is in Lusail. It's in Al Maha Island. The northern part is celebrating its Lusail Wonderland, a fun fair that will occupy the northern part of the island. Just across from there, we have Qtaifan Island with a water park and a whole family destination. And for the very first time, visitors will have public access to our founder's original fort and houses in Lusail. I feel that this museum not only acts as a think tank about identity and migration, the effects of post-colonialism to our region, but also a connector to Lusail and the founder of Qatar, to the attractions that have been developed, to the stadium. It's a completely new project for you in terms of having a museum of this scale connect with everything around it. How does that make you react as an architect?
Not everything that you just mentioned was yet on the table when we started to do the project. But we, as you know, the original site for the project was somewhere else, was in Doha, not in Lusail. And that shift was interesting in what I started to explain earlier in our conversation, which is about land making. The building has a shape that is like a fragment of a sphere. And a sphere is literally the kind of the one form in the universe that is defining all material, whatever is matter is based on these spheres, on planets. And so it's very much related to land making and, being a place, And I think that island didn't have a structure, didn't have a pre-existing buildings or a part of the city. So the building itself has to be like the foundation, like building the ground of something that could become a fragment of a city or a piece of land. So that's the real, let's say, origin of our thinking behind the form and the material and the facade and the space. And as I said before, and I said about ornament, about holistic, the idea of the holistic, the Lucerne Museum is a very holistic concept, because whatever you see is form, is ornament, is space, is facade at the same time, because it's all the same material. And you enter it, and whatever, you go deeper and deeper into it, and you carve out spaces that are very diverse, that give you totally different experiences. And I think it has to be like this, very powerful and very strong in itself, so it can be there as something, as an object which is different in itself and is, let's say, a partner in the space against the before mentioned stadium or the fun park, which are also in themselves very, let's say, unique worlds and different worlds. And I think that not only juxtaposition, that combination and collection of different worlds and different experiences is what will make Lusail such an interesting part of Doha.
No, I agree. Your project was initially, I keep saying your project, but it's really our project, was initially presented for the former Alauddin Place Park, entertainment park just next to Qatar. But because of the potential of what it does for the nation, it was shifted to the future city of Lusail, and it's been an exciting journey. As we relocate, we had to rethink the size and the scale of the project and how it fits with Lusail as opposed to the original location. It takes me to your recent project, which I'm hoping to visit in March when you're there, the Mplus Hong Kong project, which is really the new cultural destination of Hong Kong that takes multiple assets or facets in arts and culture. Could you say a little bit more about the project and what it has done for Hong Kong?
I think it is different but not dissimilar to the Lucerne Museum insofar that it is very much anchored, and anchoring itself in the existing ground. It's also a piece of reclaimed land on top of a train tunnel that when we did the competition, the project is based on a competition entry that we have been winning, and we discovered that tunnel that connects the airport with Hong Kong. And whereas most competitors saw this as an obstacle, hindering themselves to be more free in the spatial arrangement, and we found it very interesting and we're digging it out like a piece of archaeology across above which we then organized a museum, like hovering above that ground. And that dugout space, which is we then called it the found space, is not similar to the oil tanks in the Tate, which is also buried in the ground and is more a potential than an obstacle, because as we know, artists today, they love unusual and unlikely spaces to produce their installation pieces, their projections, whatever. So that is certainly a very strong asset that the Mplus has. And you come in and then you see down this abyss, I would almost say, in this deep hole where this world is organized around that tunnel, that buried train tunnel. And above which then we have this hovering piece, which is the slab, the podium, with more traditional loft and white cube style galleries, but also cabinet-like galleries. It doesn't have maybe the same diversity of unlikely spaces as Lucerne Museum will have, but it's very similar in that combination of things you would not expect in one only building. It has also a tower. I have to mention this kind of slab, which is also a typical element in Hong Kong. The towers, Hong Kong is a city of towers. So the tower should also not be just a commercial typology, but also a museum typology. So we added this very thin slab, which is a tower, but also a place for art and a place for artists, because artists can use it for projections that they project. They are literally like a face towards Hong Kong. And that works amazingly well. That is quite spectacular.
Well, I look forward to visiting Mplus. You also, staying in China, you built the Beijing National Stadium. I recall when I attended the Olympics back in 2008, it looked like a bird's nest. And when I asked you about it later, you said that you explored China, and maybe I've gotten the story wrong, but you explored the China with Ai Weiwei, who was a friend of yours, and that inspired the bird's nest. Could you say a little bit about how you came about with the bird's nest? And then, you've done a stadium for the Olympics, and then you've also done the Allianz Arena in Munich for the FIFA. So you've done it all, really. You've done both FIFA and the Olympics, but these stadiums are so different. So tell us a little bit about that.
The biggest difference, besides the fact that one is in China and one is in Germany, is that one is football and one is athletics, athletic games. And football is like a marmite, is like a pot, a hot pot, between two teams, and fan groups, which are very opposed one to each other, sometimes very hostile and very aggressive. And I like to enhance that fighting aspect in a stadium, in a football stadium, in that we bring the spectator very close to the pitch and to the players, almost like in a Shakespearean theater, where the actors and the crowd was almost interacting each other. We made the first experiment of that kind in the Basel Stadium, St. Jakob Park. That was the first soccer stadium we've done. And the Allianz Arena is then the bigger brother of it. So that's one type. And we, because it's a freestanding piece, we use that idea of colors and changing colors to express the diversity of teams that would play in that arena. And the bird's nest is more the idea of a more peaceful coming together, athletes of various nations. There's never one against one, but there's many almost assembled under the daylight, almost like in antique Greece. It's a totally different spirit we want to infuse, and the atmosphere in the stadium could not be compared, really. It would be difficult in the bird's nest to create the same atmosphere and density of fighting atmosphere as in the Allianz Arena. So that's, I would say, the biggest difference when it comes to qualify the kind of architectural space inside those two buildings.
So it's really always about the function, location, and the purpose of the building.
Yeah, but I would say it's, of course, the function. Every architect has to respect the function, but it's taking it further. It's taking the function, make the function, because, a house which has a door, and the obvious function is to open and close the door, but that doesn't make the door especially interesting. There are other things that make it interesting, and the function that, you have to have an ideal view line to see the pitch or whatever, that's one thing. But we want to enhance, let's say, that idea of the fight, or we want to enhance this idea of being assembled under the daylight, almost on the grass. That's so the function is just almost an excuse to then define the architectural space out of that.
I've known Nicolas Burguan for a while now, and I know you're building his institute in California, just opposite another great Swiss architect, Peter Zumthor, who's building LACMA. And I've seen Zumthor's project, I haven't seen yours. But how are you thinking about the building or the Burguan Institute in California, given that it's a multidisciplinary think tank addressing world questions?
It's a spectacular site, and there have been. It's been very complicated to get a building permit, and Nicholas is exposed to. Talking to neighbors since 2-3 years, and so that's an ongoing process, which is hopefully finishing soon, so we can start doing the building. We saw this as a kind of because it's very difficult to define exactly what is the Burguan Institute. It's maybe a mixture between a monastery and an assembly hall, kind of a parliament, a world parliament, a kind of place for scholars or school, and also a park, and actually also a public place, for people to go and visit. And all of that has been leading to this idea of a hovering frame, which is expressing that sense of togetherness, at the same time opening up views, because, as I said, the site is so spectacular. So that should also be expressed in the architecture. This horizontal, or this wide horizon, literally across the Bay of Los Angeles, is certainly expressed in the building. And this aspiration of the universal is expressed, I would say, quite playfully in this idea of the sphere. There is a sphere which is something between, I would say, a universal form like the Pantheon in Rome and a billiard ball. So it's both has a pop side and also I would say almost a scientific or historic side. So it's a place which is connecting, let's say, not only in its programmatic layout, but also in its architectural concept, very different worlds and very different aspirations.
No, I agree. It's the Institute does so much. So to define it with architecture, with one architectural identity, must be so challenging. But I think Nicholas chose correctly. He chose the right person to do this project. So I look forward to seeing that. Jacques, can you tell us what the Baywood Terraces are?
The Baywood Terraces is basically a tower. It's also an experimental building insofar that Baywood is an attractive hotspot for multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic place, and very often very conflictual. So it's also very sad to see what actually is happening after, especially that explosion 2 years ago. And but we visited Baywood several times and found that combination, that kind of the fact that so many people with different backgrounds have been living there for long periods in a quite peaceful, stable way. So that's actually also one of the reasons why we thought it makes sense to do a building there. Now the building is commercial, you could say. It's a developer that commissioned us based on a competition, and we said it only makes sense if we can do it in an experimental way. So we tried to bring in vegetation and terraces in a way that has never been done before in Baywood. So each apartment, each house in that house could have a very individual quality, where the hot climate, but also the sun exposure, which is very interesting to bring in vegetation, also in very high up in the building, and using the terraces not only to create individually and specific sites, but also to shade the building and to add to a very playful sculptural appearance outside.
And you've built so many different projects, from houses to museums to stores to towers. Is there something you haven't done yet?
I'm actually interested in religious spaces. without, let's say, a specific religion in mind, but it interests me very much for the reasons I tried to explain a bit when we were talking about the mosque in the Mezquita in Cordoba or in Kairouan or in other cities. I like, even if I'm not religious, I like that idea. I try to find out what that could be and what that could mean today in the 21st century, even if you're not attracted by a specific religious thinking.
And Jacques, you've been coming to Qatar, I think, for over 15 years. How have you seen the evolution of the country?
I think, we saw an avalanche, an amazing amount of new buildings, some extraordinary buildings done by some of the best colleagues we have, and some more commercial and less interesting and attractive. Unfortunately, I always thought that Qatar could be really much more even a model on an urbanistic level. But yes, you have invited some architect friends that have done amazing things. So I think that's increasingly visible, and we hope that we can contribute with the Lusail Museum to that collection. But not only as architectural vanities, but I think all of these projects are quite intelligent in that they are also platforms for learning, for education. And I think I see that this is at the heart of where you want to go as a country. You are a country that is often criticized in the West, as you know, and you are undergoing a lot of pressure, but I see big efforts of the country as a whole. And I mean, I especially know you for more than 15 years, and I trust that this is a very interesting path. And all these projects, and also the World Cup, I see that as moments in history of your country that will further improve what you want to be in the future.
Thank you, Jacques, so much for your time. I hope the Swiss national team visits our exhibition of the Lusail Museum, as well as all the cultural programs that we're offering as the Qatar creates annual offerings. And I really look forward to seeing you soon in Qatar. And good luck to your Swiss team for the World Cup.
Yeah. Thank you, Sheikha. Great pleasure always to talk to you.